Most people spend their whole lives hoping someone remembers them. Hazel Merrick spent hers certain no one ever had. She was 8 years old the first time she understood what being forgotten felt like. A butter yellow sweater, a window seat at St. Agnes, a promise from strangers who said they'd come back before Christmas. They didn't. She waited until the sky turned gray, then dark. Then someone finally came and told her it was time for bed. For the next 14 years, Hazel stopped waiting for anyone. She learned to fold her clothes small enough to fit in a single bag. She learned that family was a word other children used. She learned that when a farmhouse takes you in at 16, sometimes it isn't because they want a daughter. Sometimes it's because they want someone to milk the cows before sunrise. She left that farmhouse at 19. Didn't say goodbye, didn't leave a note. By 22, she was pouring coffee at a small diner in Ashford Falls, telling herself she didn't need anyone. Alone in her rented room above the auto shop, she'd fall asleep to the sound of trucks on 3rd Street and almost believe it. Then one rainy Tuesday, the phone rang. A lawyer. A grandfather she'd never heard of. A floating house on a lake called Willowmere. In one sentence that would unravel everything Hazel thought she knew about her life. Miss Merrick, your grandfather spent 22 years looking for you. She had never been forgotten. She had only been kept away. The first thing Hazel Merrick remembered clearly wasn't a face, it was a color. Butter yellow. The soft kind. The kind that looked like something warm, even when the room was cold. She was 8 years old. It was December, the year the county had the coldest winter in a decade. The pipes at St. Agnes had frozen twice that week, and the woman who ran the home, Sister Beatrice, all elbows and quiet sighs, had told Hazel to sit by the window in the front parlor and wait. So she waited. The sweater she wore was new, or new to her. Sister Beatrice had pulled it out of a plastic bag that morning and told her to put it on because a nice couple was coming to visit. A nice couple who had come 3 times already, a nice couple who had brought Hazel a coloring book and a small pink flashlight and had told her on the last visit that they'd be back before Christmas. To take her home. That was the word they used, home. Hazel didn't know what to do with that word. She turned it around in her mouth like a hard candy she was afraid to bite. She practiced saying it in the mirror upstairs. Home, home, home. She sat by the window in the butter yellow sweater and watched the driveway. She watched it in the morning. She watched it after lunch. She watched it as the light in the parlor slid across the floor and turned gray. She watched it as Sister Beatrice came in twice to ask if she wanted to eat something, and Hazel said no thank you both times because she didn't want to be chewing when they pulled up. She watched it until the streetlight flickered on, which happened at 4:52 in December. She watched it until Sister Beatrice came in a third time and stood in the doorway a long moment and didn't say anything at all. Just walked over, sat down beside her on the window seat, put a hand on Hazel's knee. Sweetheart. That was all. That was the whole sentence. But Hazel had already learned the shape of adult voices. She knew what a soft one meant. She didn't cry, not right then. She said, maybe they had a flat tire. Sister Beatrice didn't answer. Maybe they got lost. Sister Beatrice pulled her closer. Maybe tomorrow. And that was the sentence that broke. Because Sister Beatrice said very carefully, I don't think they're coming, honey. Hazel didn't cry then either. She sat very still. She looked at the driveway. She counted the streetlight blinks. She counted them until she got to 100 and lost her place and started again. That night she folded the butter yellow sweater and put it in the bottom of her drawer. She kept it there for the next 11 years, even after it stopped fitting. Even after the sleeves reached only to her elbows. Even after she left St. Agnes at 16, even after the farmhouse, even after the diner. She kept it. Because some part of her, the part that never quite finished being 8 years old, kept thinking that maybe one day someone would come. And when they did, she'd want proof that she had been ready. The farmhouse belonged to the Boones. They lived 40 miles outside Ashford Falls on a stretch of dirt road that didn't get plowed until 3 days after every snow. The house was pale green. The porch sagged. There was a rooster named Gerald who ran the driveway like he owned it. Mr. Boone was quiet. Mr. Boone was mostly a shape that moved between the barn and the kitchen and the barn again. Mrs. Boone did the talking. Mrs. Boone did all the talking. The first time Hazel met Mrs. Boone was at the county office. Hazel was 16 and thin and had a small canvas bag with everything she owned. Mrs. Boone had looked her up and down and said to the social worker, not to Hazel, she's older than I asked for, but I suppose she'll do. That sentence lived in Hazel's chest for 3 years. She'll do. Mrs. Boone had 2 daughters of her own. Emma was 12, Lily was 9. They had a bedroom on the second floor with pink curtains and a canopy bed and a bookshelf with books that had never been read but looked pretty on the shelf. Hazel slept in what used to be a mudroom. It had been converted. Sort of. There was a mattress on a wooden frame and a hook on the wall for her coat and a small window that looked out at the henhouse. In winter, the water in the glass on her nightstand froze by morning. She was up at 4 every day because the cows didn't wait. She milked. She fed the chickens. She scraped ice off the water troughs. She scrubbed the kitchen floor. She hung the laundry. She peeled potatoes. She minded Lily when Mrs. Boone had errands. She helped Emma with math homework she herself had never been taught. She went to school when there was time, which wasn't often. Mrs. Boone would say at breakfast in the same voice she used to ask for the salt, "Hazel, honey, not today. There's too much to do." Hazel would nod. Hazel would always nod. And she would say, "Yes, ma'am." Because what else was there to say? At Christmas, Emma got a bicycle, blue with white streamers on the handlebars. Lily got a set of art supplies in a wooden box with a brass clasp. Hazel got a scarf. It was gray. It had a small hole near the fringe. Mrs. Boone said, "I found it in the church donation bin. It's still good." Hazel said, "Thank you." She said it 3 times, because that was the polite number. And she wore the scarf all winter, because it was warm, and because she had learned very young that being useful was safer than being seen, and you couldn't refuse a gift without being seen. She left 3 weeks after her 19th birthday. She didn't plan it, not really. It happened on a Tuesday in April. She was hanging laundry on the line behind the barn. The wind kept catching the sheets and slapping them against her face. She had been up since 3:30 because a heifer was calving. She had not eaten since the night before. Mrs. Boone came out onto the porch, called across the yard, "Hazel, when you're done with that, the pantry needs organizing, and the girls need a snack." Hazel didn't answer. She stood in the wet grass with the sheet in her hand, and she felt something inside her chest not break exactly, more like a door that had been closed for a very long time, and she felt it swing open, just a little, just enough. That night, after everyone was asleep, she folded her clothes into her canvas bag. She took the butter yellow sweater from where it lived at the bottom of her drawer, and she put it on top of everything else. She took the $23 she had saved from birthday cards over the years. She walked to the end of the driveway. She didn't look back at the house. She looked at the sky, which was very dark, which had no moon that night, and she started walking toward town. She didn't leave a note, because there was no one in that house who would have read it and been sad. Ashford Falls was a small town, small enough that everyone knew everyone, small enough that she was worried at first that someone would call the Boones and tell them where she was. But no one did, because no one really noticed her, which was in a strange way the first freedom she had ever known. She found a job at Miller's Diner within a week. She was a good waitress, trained by hard women to move fast, remember orders, smile without meaning it, and never take up space. She worked the 6 to 2 shift and then the 2 to 10 on Saturdays. She saved up. She rented a room above the auto shop on 3rd Street from a widower named Stan, who charged her $200 a month and never asked questions. The room was small. The room was hers. The first night she slept in it, she cried. Not because she was sad, because she couldn't remember the last time she had slept somewhere that didn't belong to someone else. She was 22 now. 3 years in Ashford Falls. She had a routine. She had the diner. She had her room above the auto shop. She had a small pot of basil on the windowsill that she was very proud of because she had kept it alive for a whole year. She didn't have friends. Not really. She had Marcy, who worked the morning shift and gossiped about the regulars. She had Stan downstairs, who always waved when she came home. She had a nod from Pastor Elms at the corner when she walked past on Sundays. That was enough. That was more than enough. That was everything she needed. That was what she told herself. Some nights, though, some nights she'd lie in bed and listen to the trucks going by on 3rd Street, and she'd think about who was in those trucks, where they were going, whether anyone was waiting up for them. She never let herself finish that thought. The phone call came on a Tuesday, because of course it did. Because everything in Hazel's life seemed to happen on Tuesdays. It was raining, not hard, just steady. The kind of rain that made the diner smell like wet coats and coffee. She had just refilled a table's water glasses when Marcy waved her over to the phone at the counter. "For you." "Me, some lawyer." "The lawyer," Marcy shrugged. "That's what he said." Hazel wiped her hands on her apron, picked up the phone, held it against her ear, the way you'd hold something that might explode. "Hello. Is this Miss Hazel Merrick?" "Yes." "Miss Merrick, my name is Edgar Prewitt. I'm calling on behalf of the estate of Mr. August Merrick." Silence. She waited. She waited for the name to mean something. It didn't. "I'm sorry," she said. "I don't know that name." There was a pause on the other end, a polite one. "Miss Merrick, August Merrick was your grandfather." She almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because sometimes the body does strange things when it doesn't know what else to do. I don't have a grandfather, she said, which sounded ridiculous even as she said it, because of course she had a grandfather. Everyone had a grandfather. She just hadn't ever met hers, and she hadn't ever known his name. And she had at some point around the age of 10 or 11 stopped believing that any of the missing people in her life were real people at all. They had become, in her mind, weather, just conditions she had been born under. Edgar Pruitt was very kind. He said, I understand this is a great deal to take in. She said, there must be some mistake. He said, there is no mistake, Miss Merrick. Your grandfather passed away 6 weeks ago. His will names you as his sole beneficiary. She stared at the pie case across the counter. She stared at the lemon meringue. She said, beneficiary of what? He said, a property on Willowmere Lake, about 90 minutes north of Ashford Falls. It's a house, a rather unusual one, and its contents. She said, Willowmere Lake. He said, yes. She said, I've never been there. He said, I know. And then, and this was the part she would remember for the rest of her life, Edgar Pruitt cleared his throat, very softly, the way people do when they're about to say something they've practiced saying. He said, Miss Merrick, there's one more thing you should know before you decide anything. Your grandfather spent 22 years looking for you. She did not answer. She could not, because the words landed somewhere inside her chest that had been sealed shut for so long. So long she had forgotten it was there. She stood in the diner. She held the phone. The lemon meringue pie stared at her from behind the glass. Marcy was refilling coffee at table 6. The rain was steady against the window. And Hazel Merrick, 22 years old, orphaned by paperwork raised by strangers, stood very still and tried very hard not to let the small voice inside her start hoping. Because hoping was dangerous. Because hoping was what 8-year-olds did in butter yellow sweaters. She said, I don't understand. Edgar Pruitt said very gently, I'd like to help you understand, Miss Merrick. When can you come? She took 3 days off from the diner. Marcy raised an eyebrow. Marcy said, you okay, honey? Hazel said, I don't know yet. Marcy said, that's fair. Stan downstairs lent her his old Buick. He didn't ask why. He just handed her the keys and said, fill her up before you bring her back. She said, I will. He said, and Hazel. She turned. Whatever it is. He paused. Don't come back scared. Come back different if you have to, but not scared. She didn't know what to say to that, so she just nodded, and she drove. The road to Willowmere wound through country she had never seen before. Wooded, quiet, the kind of trees that looked like they had opinions. She followed the directions Edgar Pruitt had emailed her. Turn at the split birch, left at the mailbox, shaped like a fish, down the gravel road to the water. She almost missed it. The lake didn't announce itself. One moment she was driving through woods. The next moment the trees opened up and there it was, long and gray and still wrapped in early morning mist, so quiet it looked like the earth was holding its breath. She parked at the top of a small hill. She got out. The air smelled like pine needles and something colder underneath. Something that was almost but not quite the smell of home. She walked down to the water. There was a dock, old, wooden. Some of the boards were newer than others, patched over the years. At the end of the dock, floating on the surface of the lake, like a stubborn old thought, was the house. It wasn't like any house she had ever seen. It sat on a wide, flat platform, the kind that was half barge, half foundation. It rocked very slightly with the lake. It had a peaked roof and 2 windows in the front and a small chimney. It was painted a soft, dove gray. The shutters had once been white. Now they were the color of driftwood. Hazel stood at the edge of the dock. She held the brass key Edgar Pruitt had given her. She was very cold. She was not sure she was breathing, she thought, and this thought embarrassed her. Even as she thought it, she thought, what if there's no one there? Which was ridiculous, because of course there was no one there. That was the whole point. The man who had lived in that house was gone. That was why she was standing on this dock. That was why the key was in her hand, except there was another thought underneath the first one. What if there is? Not a person. She wasn't stupid. She wasn't losing her mind. But something the man had left behind. Something waiting. She stepped onto the dock. The boards creaked. She walked to the door. She put the key in the lock. It turned, cleanly, like the lock had been waiting. She pushed the door open. The first thing she noticed was the smell. Cedar, old paper, lake water, and something else. Something that was almost, but not quite coffee. The second thing was the light. It came in through lace curtains older than she was. Filtered, soft, the kind of light that turned dust into small floating pieces of gold. The third thing was that the house didn't feel empty. It felt paused. There was a coffee mug on the small kitchen table. There was still coffee in it. Cold, of course, ringed at the bottom. But it hadn't been rinsed, it had just been set down, like someone had meant to come back. There was a pair of reading glasses next to the mug, folded, on top of a folded newspaper. The newspaper was 6 weeks old. There was a rocking chair by the window that faced the lake. There was a knitted blanket over the back of the chair. There was a book on the arm of the chair spine cracked open, held in place by a small leather bookmark shaped like a fish. Hazel took 2 steps into the house. Then 3. Then she stopped. Because she didn't know where to put herself. Because every corner of the room had been arranged by a life that wasn't hers. Because the man who had lived here had known she was coming in some way. Had left the mug and the glasses and the book like a table set for a guest who hadn't arrived in time. She sat down. She didn't mean to. Her knees just gave. She sat in the rocking chair by the window. She had never in her life sat in a chair that faced a view. Every chair she had ever sat in had faced work. A stove, a desk, a customer, a pile of laundry. This chair faced water. She looked out at the lake. She rocked, once, twice, and a small voice inside her said very clearly, "I don't know who I am in a room like this." She spent the first hour just walking, room to room, slowly, touching very little, like a woman in a museum. The house had 4 rooms, a living room, a small kitchen, a bedroom with a metal bed frame and a quilt, and a room at the back with bookshelves floor to ceiling and a single reading chair. She stood in the doorway of the reading room a long time. She was drawn to it. She didn't know why. She stepped in. She ran her fingers along the shelves. The books were old. Many were about local history. Some were about lakes and fish. Some were novels worn at the spines. There were photo albums on the lower shelves, bound in dark leather. She pulled one album out. She opened it. The first page was a photograph of a young woman, 20s. Maybe, standing on the dock outside, barefoot, sundress, hair the color of wheat. She was laughing at something that the person behind the camera had said. Hazel stared, because the woman in the photograph. The woman on the dock had Hazel's mouth, Hazel's exact mouth. She closed the album. She couldn't breathe. She put it back on the shelf. She stood there a long time, with her hand pressed against the spine of the album like she was holding a door shut. Then she stepped back, bumped into the reading chair, steadied herself against the bookshelf behind her. And that was when the shelf moved. It wasn't much, just a soft click, just an inch of give. She froze. She thought I imagined that. She pushed the shelf again. On purpose this time. It gave, and the whole bookshelf, the entire section. It swung very slowly on a hidden hinge, and behind it set into the wall was a small blue door. The door was old. The paint was chipped. There was a brass keyhole in the middle. Hazel took 2 steps back. She said out loud to no one, "No." She said it the way you say no to a stove when you've burned your hand. Because whatever was behind that door, she was not ready for it. She was not ready for any of this. She had gotten here this morning. She had been in this house for maybe 90 minutes. She had already seen a photograph of a woman with her own mouth. And now there was a hidden door. And she had a key, which fit exactly one lock, which was clearly not the front door because the front door was a normal lock, and her key was small and brass and old. She reached into her pocket. She took the brass key out. She stared at it. She stared at the door. She said out loud again, "No, no, 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 no," which is what a person says when they know they are absolutely going to do the thing they're telling themselves not to do. She knelt down in front of the small blue door. She slid the key in. It fit. Of course it fit. She turned it. There was a soft, deep click. The door creaked open. Cold air. That was the first thing. Cold air rising up from below. The air smelled like old paper, and something older underneath. Not damp, exactly. Preserved. She peered in. There were stairs, wooden, narrow. Going down, she could not see the bottom. She stood up. She said, "Okay." She said it to herself. The way you say "okay" right before you jump into cold water. She went back to the kitchen. She found a flashlight in the drawer next to the sink. She had known it would be there, which was strange, which was the kind of thing that would bother her later when she had time to be bothered by things. But right now she just took the flashlight and clicked it on and walked back to the reading room. The blue door was still open. The cold air was still rising. She sat on the top step. She took one long breath. She went down. The staircase went farther than she expected, which shouldn't have been possible, because the house was floating, because there was technically water underneath her. But the stairs kept going, and then they didn't. The flashlight beam hit the bottom step, and then the floor. And then Hazel stepped down onto the floor, and the room opened up around her. It was large, larger than the house upstairs, which meant she realized slowly with a small, dizzy feeling behind her eyes that the platform the house was built on must be hollow. The whole floating foundation, a hidden lower level, suspended under the lake surface, windowless, silent. Trunks lined the walls, rows of them, old wooden trunks, some larger than others, all labeled, all neatly arranged. Shelves ran between the trunks, boxes on the shelves, manila envelopes, bundles of letters tied with string, framed photographs stacked with care, small wooden crates, ledgers, journals. Hazel took a step forward, and then another. The flashlight beam moved across the shelves like a slow eye. There was so much. There was so much. She could not process what she was seeing. Her mind kept trying to make it into something smaller. A storage room, an antique shop, a private collection. But it wasn't any of those. Because everything down here had been kept the way you keep the things that matter. Not stored, kept. She walked to the nearest trunk. She knelt. She lifted the lid. Inside photographs. Hundreds, loose and in albums, weddings, funerals, birthdays, baptisms, family reunions on somebody's back lawn in the 1950s, Christmas trees with tinsel, two little boys in bow ties, a woman holding a baby with tears in her eyes, an old man laughing so hard his cheeks had folded up over his eyes. Strangers, all strangers. But someone had kept them. Someone had kept them like they were the most valuable things on earth. She closed the trunk very gently. She stood. She moved to the next. Letters. Dozens. Bundled with string. Some yellowed. Some in different handwriting. Some in other languages. One tied with a blue ribbon so old the color had softened almost to gray. She moved to the next. Small objects. A wedding band, a pocket watch, a locket, a tin soldier, a pair of baby shoes, each one wrapped in tissue paper, each one labeled with a small tag, a name, a date, a city. She sat down on the floor. She sat down because her legs wouldn't hold her anymore. She didn't understand. She didn't understand any of it. Who were all these people? Why had one man kept all of this? Why here? Why now? Why her? She stayed on the floor a long. She didn't cry. She didn't do anything. She just sat there. The flashlight beam pointed at the wall, the dust drifting through it. She had come here because a stranger had left her a house. She was starting to understand slowly with the strange calm you get when your world is quietly falling apart that he had not left her a house. He had left her a promise. She just didn't know yet what the promise was. She got up. She kept walking. The room was longer than she had thought. It went back and back. More trunks, more shelves. And then near the far end, tucked against the wall, she saw a small wooden box that stood alone. Just one box, on a shelf by itself. The box was not labeled. Every other object down here had a name and a date and a city. Not this one. She approached it carefully, like it might move. She lifted the lid. Inside folders, manila. Thick, neatly stacked. She took the top one out. She opened it. Newspaper clippings. Photocopies of adoption records. Letters on official letterhead from state agencies. A list of children's homes across 3 states with names crossed off one by one in careful handwriting. Handwritten notes in the leather notebook. No record. Try again spring. New caseworker assigned. Court denied appeal. Home closed 2016. Records sealed. Try Ashford Falls. Her hands started shaking. She didn't want to keep looking. She kept looking. She flipped to the next folder. She flipped to the next. And then at the very bottom of the box, in a plain white envelope with soft corners like it had been handled many times, she found a photograph. She stared at it. She could not at first understand what she was looking at. Then she did. It was a photograph of a little girl, 8 years old, sitting in a window seat, in a butter yellow sweater. The photograph had been taken from the outside, through the window. The little girl was looking out. Her hands were folded in her lap. Her face was very still. Hazel knew that face. She knew that face better than she knew anyone else's. It was hers. She sat down on the floor for the second time. She held the photograph in both hands. She held it the way you hold something that might turn into water. Under the photograph was a small square of cardstock. She turned it over. There was handwriting on the back. Blue ink. Careful. The letters slanted slightly to the right. The card said, "I found you, Hazel. August, November 3, 2012. She stared at the date. She stared at the ink. She whispered, "That's..." She couldn't finish. She tried again. "That's..." She stopped. She knew that date. She knew it because she had lived it. November 3rd, 2012 was a Tuesday. It was the first snow of that year. It was 2 months before Christmas. It was the day the couple who had promised to come back had not come back. It was the day she had sat by the window in the butter yellow sweater and waited. He had been there. He had been outside. He had stood in the snow and taken a photograph of her through the window of St. Agnes on the exact day she had been sitting there, thinking no one on earth wanted her. Someone had wanted her. Someone had been standing outside that window with a camera in his hand, looking at her, thinking, there she is. There she is. I found her. Hazel started crying. Not the polite kind of crying. Not the crying she had done alone in her room above the auto shop when she was 20 and homesick for a home she'd never had. This was different. This came from underneath. This came from a part of her that had been sitting in a window seat for 14 years, waiting for someone to prove it hadn't been alone. She held the photograph against her chest. She did not know she was rocking until she noticed she was rocking. She whispered into the empty room. You came, she whispered. You came for me. And then more quietly, because she needed to know, even though there was no one there to answer, why didn't you take me? She stayed down in that room for a long time. She didn't move. She just sat with the photograph in her hands and the flashlight beam pointing at the wall and the quiet lapping of the lake against the platform somewhere below her. Eventually, she didn't know how long she looked up. Her flashlight caught something in the far corner, something with brass fittings, something with a lens. She stood up. On unsteady legs, she walked toward it. It was a projector, an old one, the kind she had seen in a museum on a school field trip when she was 10. A hand cranked reel to reel mounted on a small table, pointed at the blank wall. It was clean. Everything else in the room was covered in a very fine layer of dust, the kind that gathers when the air itself hardly moves. But not the projector. The projector had been dusted. Recently. Wiped down, prepared, waiting. A reel of film was already loaded onto it, and on top of the projector, propped against the frame, was an envelope. The envelope was cream-colored. Across the front, in the same blue ink and the same careful, slanted handwriting, was one word, Hazel. She looked at that envelope for a long time before she reached for it. She reached for it, the way you reach for a hand you have not held in years. She opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Folded once, she unfolded it. There were only 2 sentences. If you found this, please play it. It's the only way I know how to say the things I never got to say. Under that smaller, almost like it had been added after everything else was written. I'm sorry it took me so long to find you, sweetheart. The word sweetheart landed inside her like a stone dropped into still water because no one in her entire life had ever called her sweetheart the way it was written on that page. Not Sister Beatrice, not Mrs. Boone, not Marcy at the diner, not the couple who never came back. She held the note in her hand. She looked at the projector. She looked at the wall where the film would land. She could turn the crank right now. She could see his face. She could hear his voice. She could learn in the next 20 minutes everything he had spent 22 years trying to tell her. Or she could go back upstairs. She could close the blue door. She could get in the Buick. She could drive back to Ashford Falls, give Stan his keys, put on her apron, pour coffee, pretend this had all been someone else's life. She thought about that. She thought about it hard, because part of her, the part that had folded the butter yellow sweater at the bottom of a drawer for 14 years, was terrified. Terrified of hearing the voice, terrified of knowing, terrified that if she pressed play and let him talk to her, really talk to her, she would never again be able to survive her life the way she had survived it so far. Small, quiet, alone, certain that being unwanted was a fact instead of a wound. Because if he had wanted her, the whole time, then the story she had been telling herself since she was 8 years old was not a story about the world. It was a story about a wall between her and the people who had been trying to reach her. And Hazel didn't know yet if she was strong enough to admit the wall had been there. Because if she admitted it, she would have to admit that she had been loved. And she would have to grieve 22 years of not knowing. She sat down on the floor in front of the projector. She put the note beside her. She put the photograph of herself in the butter yellow sweater on the other side. She put her hand on the crank. She closed her eyes. She thought about the 8-year-old at the window. She thought, sweetheart. He was outside, she thought, sweetheart. He was outside the whole time. She opened her eyes. She turned the crank. The projector clicked. The reel began to spin. A soft, mechanical hum filled the room. Light flickered on the wall. Static, 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 and then a face. And the face on the wall was old. That was the first thing she noticed. Not old the way she had pictured. Not old the way strangers were old. This was a specific old. This was a face that had waited, a face that had been shaped by waiting. Silver hair, combed back, a little uneven, like he had done it himself in a mirror without paying much attention. A gray flannel shirt, reading glasses tucked into the pocket. He was sitting in the rocking chair, the chair that was upstairs, the chair Hazel had been sitting in less than 2 hours ago. He looked at the camera. He looked at her. He smiled. It wasn't a big smile. It was the small kind. The kind people use when they're trying very hard not to cry. He said, "Hello, Hazel." That was it. 2 words. But she folded forward on the floor of the hidden room as if he had reached through the wall and touched her hair. Because no one had ever said her name that way. Ever. She had heard Hazel barked across a farmhouse kitchen. She had heard Hazel called from behind the diner counter. She had heard it stamped on paperwork. Filed, alphabetized, repeated flat like a form. She had never heard it said like it belonged to somebody. Like she belonged to somebody. He said it like her name was something he had been carrying in his pocket for a very long time, and now he could finally set it down. She pressed her hand against her mouth. She whispered because whispering felt safer. Hi. He looked away from the camera for a moment, down at his hands. His hands were on his lap. Big knuckles. The skin thin. The hands of a man who had built things once. Fixed engines, repaired docks, held babies. He said, "I don't know how to start this." He laughed, softly. He said, "I've been practicing it in my head for 22 years. He shook his head. And when you finally sit down to say it, nothing comes out right. A pause. He took a breath. He looked back at the lens. "My name is August Merrick. If you're watching this, then I ran out of time. I'm sorry, honey. I really thought I'd get to say all this in person." Hazel closed her eyes, then opened them, because she couldn't stand to not see him. Because he was here. He was here. He was in this room right now, in flickering light, 16 millimeter, in the small hum of a projector. Not a photograph, not paperwork. A grandfather. Talking to her. He told her about her mother first. He told her about Rosalind. He said, "Your mother was small. She was small her whole life. She weighed 6 pounds 2 ounces when she was born. And her mother, your grandmother, used to say she was going to be a little bird. Not a whole eagle, just a small bird, a quick one." He smiled. "That's why we picked your name." He tilted his head. "Hazel. It was your grandmother's mother's name. She had eyes the color of river stones. You have those eyes, honey. I know you can't see yourself the way I can. But when I found the first picture of you, the one from the window, I looked at you and I knew right away. Those are her eyes. My mother's eyes. Your great-grandmother's eyes. They walked all the way down the family and landed in your face." Hazel touched her cheek. She didn't know why. Her hand was shaking. He talked about Rosalind for a long time. He said Rosalind was quiet. He said Rosalind read too much. He said Rosalind was afraid of thunderstorms. He said Rosalind used to sit on the dock outside the floating house when she was little and throw bread crusts at the ducks. And she always threw too much. She could not stand the idea that one duck might have less than the others. She would empty the whole bag. She would come back inside with her hands sticky. He said Rosalind loved chamomile tea, with honey, never sugar. She said sugar was for people in a hurry. He said Rosalind was going to be a teacher. That was her plan, 3rd grade, because she remembered her 3rd grade teacher, a woman named Mrs. Halberd, who had told Rosalind in a very quiet voice one afternoon in a very quiet classroom that Rosalind was the kind of child the world would be lucky to have grown up. He said Rosalind never forgot that. He said children never forget being seen. His voice cracked, just for a second. Then he steadied it. "Your mother got sick when you were 3. Nobody knew. It was her heart. It had been a problem her whole life. She'd been born with a small hole in it. Everyone thought it had closed on its own. Everyone thought she was fine. She wasn't fine. She was pregnant with you when the first symptoms came. She hid them because she wanted you. She wanted you more than she wanted her own safety. She kept saying, 'This baby is a prayer that got answered. I'm not losing this baby.' So she carried you, and she had you, and she loved you for 4 years." He paused. "She loved you every one of those 4 years, like she knew she was borrowing time, because she was." Hazel put her forehead down against her knees. She was rocking again. She wasn't doing it on purpose. Something in her chest was making a small, awful sound. She had never heard herself make that sound before. She thought I was loved. She thought, for 4 years someone loved me before I knew what love was. She thought, and I don't remember any of it. That was the part that hurt worst, that she couldn't remember. That the woman on the film who had loved her, the small woman with the tired heart and the too many bread crusts, was someone Hazel had held and been held by, and Hazel had absolutely no memory of her at all. Not one, not a smell, not a song, not a hand on her forehead. She had spent 22 years thinking there was nothing to remember. There had been. She just hadn't been old enough to keep it. August took a breath. She died in the spring, April. You were 4, almost 4.5. You were staying with our neighbor that afternoon. She was making cookies with the neighbor's kids in the kitchen. I called her twice from the hospital. I never got there in time to tell her over the phone. Your grandmother did. Your grandmother sat with you at the kitchen table and told you. And your grandmother said you didn't cry, you just went very still. He smiled sadly. You always went very still, honey. When you were scared. I remember that. Hazel let out a small, choked breath. Because she still did that. She still did that. Even now. When something in her life got bad, she went very still. It was how Mrs. Boone had thought Hazel was calm. It was how Marcy had thought Hazel was strong. It was how Sister Beatrice had thought Hazel was easy. She had never been calm. She had been going still. Because that was what she did when the world was too much. A 4-year-old at a kitchen table. A 4-year-old who did the same thing then. August said, "This is where I made a mistake." He said it plainly. "I want to tell you what happened, because I owe you the truth. After your mother died, I was not in my right mind. I want you to know that. Not as an excuse, as a fact. Grief made me stupid. Grief made me slow. I let people around me handle things I should have handled myself. Your father was gone." He looked at the camera very steadily. "I want to be careful how I talk about him. I never met him. Your mother met him at a bookstore in a town I've never been to. She loved him for 11 months. He left before you were born. He didn't leave a forwarding address. He didn't leave a name on your birth certificate. He didn't leave anything, honey. That's not my judgment. That's just what happened. Your mother did not put my name on your birth certificate either, because your grandmother and I were still alive. And she assumed that, of course, you'd end up with us. She assumed we would raise you. She told me so, in the hospital. She held my hand. She said, 'Daddy, take care of her.' And I said, 'Of course, of course, of course.'" He looked at his hands. "I broke that promise." Hazel's stomach turned over. She whispered no, because she had already been holding him in her mind as the one person in the story who had done everything right. She didn't want him to have failed her. She had been failed enough. She said out loud into the empty room, "Please don't tell me you failed me." August on the wall kept going. Because he had recorded this without knowing she would say that. Because he was already telling her. When your mother died, your father's side of the family surfaced. I hadn't heard from them in years. Your father had a distant cousin, a woman named Pat. She was in her 40s. She lived 2 states over. She came to the funeral. She said she wanted to help. She said she would take you for a few weeks, just while we grieved, just while we caught our breath. Your grandmother had just been diagnosed with cancer that same month. I don't think you knew that. Nobody told you. You were 4. But your grandmother, my Ellen, was very sick. She was already going into treatment. And I was scared, honey. I was scared out of my mind because I was about to lose 2 women in 1 year. And I said yes to Pat. I said, just a few weeks, just till Ellen's stronger. That was my mistake. Ellen died in August, 4 months after your mother. She couldn't fight it. She was too tired and she was too sad. She kept asking about you at the end. She kept saying, "Where's the baby? Where's the baby? Bring me the baby." And I called Pat. I called her over and over. And Pat stopped answering. And then Pat's number stopped working. And then Pat had moved. By the time I found out where she had gone, she had signed you over to the state. She never had legal custody of you, but she had physical custody. And she had told a social worker. She told a social worker that she was overwhelmed, that she couldn't do it, that there was no other family. His voice was very quiet now. She erased me. She told them your mother's father was dead. She told them your grandmother was dead. She told them there was no one. Hazel was gripping her elbow so hard it hurt. She whispered, "Why?" August said from the wall, as if answering, "I don't know why. I truly don't. Money maybe, overwhelm, guilt, fear. I don't know. I've spent 22 years trying to make peace with not knowing. Some people just make small, quiet decisions that ruin other people's lives. And they don't even see themselves doing it." He was quiet for a moment. The projector hummed. Hazel's hands were cold. "By the time I found you the first time, honey, you were 8 years old." Her breath caught. "Took me almost 4 years, because Pat had put you into the system under a slightly different last name. She used your father's mother's maiden name, not Merrick. So when I called around, nobody had a Hazel Merrick, because there wasn't one on paper. I found you through a records clerk in a county office 300 miles from here, and a woman named Nadine, God bless Nadine, she found a small clerical mismatch in a file. She called me. She said, "I think this is your granddaughter." And I got in my truck at 4 in the afternoon and I drove all night. I drove straight to St. Agnes. Hazel put her hands flat against the concrete floor to steady herself, because she knew what was coming, because she had lived what was coming. It was November. It was cold. Now, there was a little snow that morning, and I got to St. Agnes at about 11 o'clock. And I walked up to the front door, and he stopped. He rubbed his eyes. "Honey, I have to tell you this next part slowly. I don't want to hurt you, but you need to know." Hazel said into the room, into the flickering light, "Tell me," even though he couldn't hear her. The woman at the front desk. She was a nun. She was polite. She listened to me. I told her who I was. I told her I had a granddaughter there, and I told her my daughter had died, and I told her there had been a family mix-up. I told her I had driven all night. She was kind. She really was. She said, "Let me check." She went in the back for a long time. And when she came out, she had another woman with her. That woman was the state caseworker assigned to your file. The caseworker said, "Mr. Merrick, according to our records, you have no legal claim on this child. Your name is not on her birth certificate. Your name is not on any of her paperwork. The person who surrendered her to the state told us there was no living family. We have no independent verification that you are related to her at all. We cannot allow you to see her today." I said, "I have pictures, I have documents, I have my daughter's birth certificate. Look at me, look at my face. She's my granddaughter." The caseworker said, "Sir, I understand this is upsetting, but we have to protect the child. We can't let strangers make claims and then walk out with a little girl. Even if your story is true, we need a court order, we need paperwork, we need time." And I said, "I have driven all night." And she said, "I know, sir. I'm sorry." He looked down. I stood outside on the front walk for a long time after that. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't just leave. So I walked around the side of the building. There was a parlor window on the north side, and the lace curtains were pulled back, and I looked in. And there you were. Hazel let out a sound, a small one, something between a breath and a word. She could not tell which. You were sitting on the window seat, in a yellow sweater. Your feet were tucked underneath you. You were watching the driveway. You didn't see me. You didn't turn. You had your hands folded in your lap. You were so small, honey. You were so small and so still. And you were watching that driveway like your whole life was going to arrive down it. I stood outside that window for maybe 2 minutes, maybe 3. I don't know. I had a camera in my truck. I went back and got it. I came back. I took one picture because I needed proof. Not for the court, for me. I needed proof I had seen you. Because if I lost the fight, if I never got you back, I needed to be able to look at that picture for the rest of my life and know I had at least seen you once. Then I got in my truck and I drove home and I started fighting. Hazel was crying. She wasn't sobbing. She was leaking. Tears were just running down her face and off her chin. Slow, steady, onto the collar of her shirt. She wasn't wiping them away. She wasn't doing anything because she was 8 years old again. In that window seat, in that sweater. And now she knew. Now she knew. He had been outside. He had been outside the whole time. While she thought no one on earth was coming for her, there had been an old man in a truck 3 feet away on the other side of the glass, taking her picture through lace curtains. So he could love her from a distance he had not been given permission to close. She had not been alone. She had never been alone. She had only been on the wrong side of the wall. August talked for a long time about the years after. I sued. In 2013. I sued for grandparent rights. I sued for custody. I sued for visitation. I sued for anything, honey. Anything I could get. It took 6 years. I lost the first 2. I appealed. I lost again. I hired a new lawyer. I lost. I hired another one. In 2019, I finally got a court to acknowledge that I was your biological grandfather. That was a partial victory. It meant I existed. It meant on paper that I was your family. But by then you were 15. And by then you were already in the process of being placed with a foster family, a couple named Boone, out on a farm. Hazel flinched. She actually flinched, hearing the name from him, hearing him say it in his voice. I fought that placement. I fought it for 3 more years. I asked for visitation. I asked to write to you. I asked to send you a birthday card. I asked to send you a package at Christmas. Every request was denied. Every one. Because the state said that a stable placement was in your best interest. And any contact from an outside relative would confuse you, would upset you, would destabilize you. I fought for you every year, every single year. Not because I want credit, but because I don't want you to spend one more day of your life thinking nobody was fighting. In 2022, I finally got visitation rights. I called the Boone's house. Mrs. Boone told me you had left the year before, at 19 in the middle of the night, without a note. She said, "We don't know where she went. And frankly, mister, we don't much care." Hazel put her fist against her mouth. She said out loud into the room, "I didn't know." She said, "I didn't know." She said, I would have. She couldn't finish the sentence because she didn't know what she would have done. She didn't know what she was capable of at 19 if a phone call had come. And someone had said, "I am your grandfather, and I love you, and I have been looking for you for 12 years. She didn't know if she would have believed it. That was the part that scared her. That was the part that scared her worst. That maybe she wouldn't have believed him, because by 19 she had already learned that the people who said they were coming back didn't come back. I hired a private investigator. It took him almost 2 years to find you. 2 years of small towns, 2 years of dead ends. He tracked you through gas station receipts, through a bounce check at a laundromat, through a call to an old landlord. He found you in early 2024 at Miller's Diner, Ashford Falls, 6 to 2 shift. He came back and told me. He gave me the address. He gave me a photograph. He had taken it from across the street. Through the diner window, you were pouring coffee. You had your hair up. You were laughing at something a customer had said. That was the second picture of you I ever had, honey. I looked at it for a very long time. He looked down. I was gathering himself. I was going to come see you. I had it planned. I was going to drive down. I was going to sit at a booth. I was going to order coffee. I was going to wait until you weren't too busy. I was going to say, "Excuse me, miss. Do you have a minute?" I had been practicing. Then I got sick. It was fast. Pancreatic cancer. Stage 4 when they found it. The doctors gave me 6 months. They were generous. It was 4. And I sat down at this kitchen table and I thought about what to do. And I decided I could not come see you. Hazel made a small hurt sound. He kept going. "I know that sounds crazy. I know it sounds like I gave up. But honey, I want you to hear me. Please hear me." I thought about it for weeks. I thought about walking into that diner. I thought about telling you who I was. And I thought about what would happen next. I saw it. I saw the whole thing. I saw myself say, "I'm your grandfather." I saw your face change. I saw you decide whether to believe me. I saw you slowly start to believe me. Because I would have made you believe me. I had the pictures. I had the paperwork. I had everything. And then I saw the next part. I saw us have 3 months together, maybe 4. I saw you starting to trust me. I saw you starting to hope. I saw you starting to think, maybe I have a family. Maybe this is where I belong. Maybe I have somewhere to go for Christmas. And then I saw myself die, and I saw you burying me. And I saw you sitting alone at my funeral. And I thought Hazel Merrick has been abandoned enough times in her life. She has been left by her father. She has been left by her mother. She has been left by a cousin. She has been left by a couple who promised to come back at Christmas. She has been left by a system. She does not need to be left by me, too. So I made a different plan. He looked directly into the camera. I put everything in order. I put every letter I had ever written you in a cedar chest. I put every photograph I had of your mother. I put every photograph I had of your grandmother, and I put my own history, my mother's history, your great-grandmother's eyes. I asked the lawyer to wait until I was gone. I asked him to tell you then, because I couldn't be a person you had to lose. I could only be a person you got to find. Hazel put her hands over her face, because she understood. She understood what he had done. She understood that he had spent his last 4 months choosing to be findable instead of choosing to be present. Because he had known, this old man had known that finding him after he was gone would hurt her less than finding him and losing him. He had loved her enough to withhold himself from her. He had loved her enough to save her from the version of grief he had already lived through with her mother. He had made a small, quiet decision to disappear again for the last time, so that when she found him, she could find him whole, preserved. In cassette tapes and letters and a floating house and a hidden room and a small blue door. Not a body in a hospital bed, a grandfather in a rocking chair, sitting exactly where she was sitting, talking to her exactly like he was doing right now. She was going to grieve him. She was going to grieve him for the rest of her life. But she would grieve him as someone she had not, someone she had lost. He had given her that. He had spent his last months giving her that. He said softly at the end, "There is a cedar chest in the corner of this room, behind the trunks on the north wall. It has your name on it. I've been writing you a letter every birthday since I found out you existed. I want you to read them slowly, honey. One a day or one a week. Don't rush. There are 22 of them. They are yours." There is also under the third floorboard by the kitchen sink, there is a small envelope. Don't open it yet. Open it when you are ready. You will know when you are ready. Trust me. There is more here than I have time to explain. And there are people who will come. Some will be kind, 1 or 2 might not be. But I want you to know something. Whatever this house asks of you, you can say no. You don't owe any of this to me. You don't owe anything to me. I did not find you so I could hand you a job. I found you so you would know you had been found. He smiled. The small smile. The kind that people use when they're trying not to cry. 22 years I looked. 22 years. And every one of them, every single one, I promise you, honey, you are not alone. I love you, Hazel. I'll see you around. He reached forward. He turned off the camera. The film flickered. The image went to static. The reel spun to its end and clicked softly and stopped. The room went dark. Only the projector's small green pilot light remained. Hazel didn't move. She could not have moved if the house was on fire. She sat on the floor in front of the wall with her arms wrapped around her knees and her face wet and her chest making the small, awful sound again. And she said into the dark, I love you too. She said it out loud, to no one, to him, to the small green light. She stayed down in the archive room for a long time after that. She read the 22 letters, not all in one sitting. She tried. She got to letter 4 and had to stop because he wrote to her on her birthday every year like she was in the next room. He wrote about the weather. He wrote about the lake. He wrote about small things her mother had done. He wrote about a chamomile plant he had grown in a windowsill for her 16th birthday, even though she wasn't there to smell it. He wrote about the songs her mother used to hum in the kitchen. He copied one down on a scrap of sheet music and tucked it into letter number 10, a lullaby. Untitled, slow. Rosalind had made it up in the last month of her pregnancy. Hazel could not read music. She stared at the notes anyway, as if she could hear them if she stared long enough. She read letter 20, written the year Hazel turned 20. He wrote, Honey, I don't know if you drink coffee or tea. I don't know if you're taller than your mother. I don't know if you sing in the shower. I don't know a single thing about the person you are becoming. But I know this, you have your grandmother's forehead. You have your mother's mouth. You have my mother's eyes. Whatever else the world has told you about yourself, please carry that. You come from women who loved things fiercely. You come from a line of women who kept looking. I don't know where you are tonight. But I hope somebody has told you good night. Hazel put the letter down. Nobody had ever told her good night, not the way he meant. She got up, she climbed the stairs. She closed the small blue door behind her. She went to the rocking chair by the window. She sat in it. She wrapped the knitted blanket around herself. She did not sleep. She just sat there. She watched the lake turn silver as the sky started to lighten. She stayed at the floating house for 3 more days. She called Marcy. She said she needed another week. Marcy said, take 2. She called Stan. She said she'd bring the Buick back soon. Stan said, take your time, kid. Nobody's stealing it. She organized. Slowly. Room by room. She made lists. She found things she had not been ready to find on the first pass. A folded photograph of her mother pregnant with her. A little wooden duck her grandfather had carved and painted for Rosalind when Rosalind was 3. A drawer of small ceramic bowls, all different colors, that Rosalind had made in high school pottery class. She left the 3rd floorboard by the kitchen sink alone, because he had said not to open it yet, because part of her was terrified of what else there could possibly be. On the 4th morning, she was on the dock, coffee in her hands, a mug that had been her grandfather's. She had washed it that morning. She had drunk out of it. She had thought, this is my mug now. She had thought it, and she had almost laughed, because it was such a small, strange thing to think, and it had felt so enormous. That was when she saw the woman, at the top of the hill next to the Buick, an older woman, silver hair pulled back low at the nape of her neck, a canvas tote bag over one shoulder, a soft camel-colored coat, even though the morning wasn't cold. The woman was just standing there, looking down at the house, not moving. Hazel stood up on the dock. The woman raised a hand, slowly, uncertain, half a wave, as if she were asking permission just to exist in the driveway. Hazel walked up the dock, up the small path from the water, up the hill. When she got close enough to see the woman's face, she noticed 2 things. The woman had been crying, recently. Not right now, but recently. Her eyes were the specific pink of someone who had cried on the drive, and the woman was holding a very small photograph in one hand. Hazel stopped a few feet away. She said, "Can I help you?" The woman opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. Then she said, "I'm sorry I read the obituary in the paper. I didn't know if I should come. I've been sitting in a coffee shop in town for 2 hours trying to decide." Hazel said, "The obituary." The woman said, "For August." Hazel said, "You knew him." The woman said, "I did." Then she stopped. She looked at Hazel's face for a long moment. Something shifted in her expression. Very quickly, almost embarrassed. Like she had been caught staring. She said softly, "You have her mouth." Hazel went cold. She said, "Whose?" The woman said, "Rosie's." Hazel said, "Nobody calls her that." The woman said, "I do." There was a long pause. The wind moved across the water behind them. A small ripple, the sound of the lake meeting the dock, the distant call of a loon. The woman said, "My name is Adele Whitcomb. I was your mother's best friend. From when we were 16 years old. I was there when you were born. I held you in the hospital. Your mother made me promise something before she died. And I have been trying in various imperfect ways to keep that promise for 22 years." Hazel didn't move. Adele said, "I know this is a lot. I know you don't know me. I can leave. I will leave if that's what you need." Hazel said, "What did you promise her?" Adele looked at the small photograph in her hand, then back at Hazel. She said, "I promised her that if her little girl ever needed a woman, I would show up." Adele lifted the photograph, just slightly, enough for Hazel to see it. It was a photograph of a young woman, 20s in a hospital bed, tired, smiling, holding a baby wrapped in a yellow blanket. Rosalind, holding Hazel. Hazel took one step forward. She said very quietly, "I'm sorry, but I'm going to need to sit down." Adele said, "That's all right, honey." Then she added softer, "I'll sit down with you." They walked both of them back down the hill toward the floating house. The wind was gentle, the lake was silver. Somewhere behind them over the trees, the first real sunlight of the morning was starting to come through. Hazel didn't know it yet. But upstairs in the cedar chest at the foot of the bed, folded in tissue paper wrapped in a small square of ribbon her mother had tied 22 years ago, there was a butter yellow baby sweater waiting. Adele took her tea with honey. Never sugar. That was the first thing Hazel noticed, because it was the exact way her mother had taken hers. According to the letters, according to the man who had loved her mother, according to a small line in a birthday letter from 2011 that Hazel had already read twice. Adele didn't announce it, didn't make a thing of it. She just poured hot water into a chipped mug at the kitchen counter. Opened the little jar of honey Hazel had found in the cupboard, spooned some in and stirred. Hazel watched her. Hazel didn't say anything, because saying anything felt like it might break something. Adele sat down at the small kitchen table across from her, both hands around the mug. She looked out at the lake through the window. She said, "This kitchen is exactly the same." Hazel said, "You've been here before?" Adele said, "Once, in 1988. Your mother brought me for a weekend. She wanted me to meet her father. She wanted me to see the lake. She was very proud of both of those things." She smiled at the memory, a tired, careful smile. "We stayed up all night on the dock, talking about boys, talking about college, talking about the kind of women we were going to be." She stopped. She took a sip of the tea. "I have thought about that weekend every day since she died." Hazel didn't know how to sit across from her. She didn't know where to put her hands. She didn't know if she was allowed to ask questions. She had never had a woman sit across a kitchen table from her and just be there. Not asking her to fetch something, not telling her to finish the dishes, not counting the seconds until Hazel got up and made herself useful. Just sitting. Hazel had lived 22 years without knowing that other women in the world sometimes just sat down at kitchen tables and drank tea with honey. She hadn't known this was a thing that people did. Adele said, "Honey, can I ask you something?" Hazel said, "Okay." Adele said, "How much of your mother do you remember?" Hazel opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. She said, "None." She said, "I don't remember her. At all." She said, "I found out an hour ago that she used to throw too much bread at ducks." Adele laughed. Actually laughed. A short, cracked laugh, and immediately after she put her hand over her mouth and her eyes filled. "Oh, oh, honey. She did that till the day she died. She fed the pigeons in the courtyard of her apartment building. She overfed every animal she ever met. She used to say, if I have extra, they can have extra. What's the point of any of this if you don't share what you have?" Hazel put her hand flat on the table, and she said, "I would like to know things about her." Adele said, "I know." Hazel said, "Small things, not big things, not sad things, just small things." Adele said, "That's what I have. That's mostly what I have, small things." Adele reached across the table. She didn't take Hazel's hand. She just put her own hand near Hazel's, close enough that Hazel could feel the warmth of it, far enough that Hazel could decide. Adele said, "I have 38 years of small things. I have been keeping them for you." Hazel didn't move for a long moment. Then she slid her hand across the table, and she let their fingers touch. They talked for 4 hours. Hazel didn't notice the time. She didn't notice the sun move. She didn't notice the second pot of tea. Adele told her that Rosalind had in the 11th grade dyed a strip of her hair red with Kool-Aid and then cried about it for a week when it wouldn't come out. Adele told her that Rosalind was terrible at math. truly terrible. That she had failed geometry twice, that August had sat at the kitchen table with her every night for a whole spring trying to explain angles, and Rosalind had eventually declared tearfully that angles were a lie invented by people who wanted her to feel small. Adele told her that Rosalind was afraid of driving, even after she got her license. She always let other people drive, even short distances, even to the grocery store. Adele told her that Rosalind had wanted to name Hazel Hazel since she was 17, that she had picked the name out one summer afternoon on a porch in Adele's mother's house, that she had said, "When I have a daughter, I'm calling her Hazel, like my grandmother's mother." Hazel is the name of a woman who doesn't apologize for taking up space. Hazel almost couldn't hold her mug, because she had spent her whole life apologizing for taking up space. And her mother, a girl on a porch, when she was 17, had picked her name specifically because she wanted her daughter to be the opposite of that. Adele told her that Rosalind had been terrified about becoming a mother, that she had cried in Adele's kitchen when she found out she was pregnant, that she had said, "What if I'm not enough? What if I don't know how? What if she deserves better?" And Adele had held her hand across the kitchen table and said, "Rosie, you already are enough. You are already exactly what she deserves," Adele said at the end of that story. And she was honey. She was exactly what you deserved. She just didn't get enough time to prove it. Hazel put her head down on the table. Adele didn't stop her. Adele put her hand very lightly on the back of Hazel's neck. Neither of them said anything for a while. The lake moved outside. The house rocked gently. When Adele finally left that evening, she stood on the dock at the edge of the water and pulled a photograph out of her coat pocket. She said, "I want you to have this." She held it out. Hazel took it. It was a photograph of two young women, maybe 20. Rosalind and Adele, sitting on the dock, this dock, their bare feet in the water. Rosalind was laughing at something. Adele was in profile mid-sentence. The sun was low and orange behind them. On the back in blue ink in a young woman's hand, someone had written, "Rosie and me, Willowmere, July." Adele said, "That was the weekend I told you about." She took a picture of us that afternoon. I've kept it in a drawer for 38 years. She said, "I want it to be with you now." Hazel held it against her chest. Adele said, "I'll come back next week if that's all right." Hazel said, "Yes." Adele said, "And the week after?" Hazel said, "Yes." Adele said, "And every week you need me to, for as long as you need me to, because I made a promise, and I intend to keep it." Hazel nodded. She could not talk. Adele leaned in. She kissed the top of Hazel's head, very quickly, very gently, the way a person kisses the top of a child's head at bedtime. Then she walked up the hill to her car, and she drove away. Hazel stood on the dock holding the photograph and watched her go. That was the first time in Hazel's life that a woman had kissed her forehead. She was 22 years old. She was going to remember it forever. The next month, Hazel did not go back to Ashford Falls. She called Marcy. She said, "I have to stay longer. I don't know how long. I don't know how to explain it." Marcy said, "Baby, you don't have to explain a thing. Just tell me you're safe." Hazel said, "I am. I really am." Marcy said, "Then I'll cover your shifts, and I'll leave the door open. Your job is here whenever you want it, or not. Whatever you decide, honey. You take care of yourself." Hazel almost cried on the phone. She didn't, but almost. Because when she asked for what she needed, the world sometimes just gave it to her. She had not known this was possible. She had a lot to learn. She started small. She woke up when the sun woke her, not when a rooster or an alarm clock told her to. She sat in the rocking chair by the window for the first hour of every morning. She drank tea, chamomile, with honey, never sugar. She read one of August's letters every day, slowly. She underlined the small facts about her mother in pencil so she could find them again. She walked to town twice a week for groceries. The nearest town was 7 miles down the road. It was called Miller's Point. It had a general store, a post office, a diner, and a gas station. The old woman at the general store was named Mrs. Kittredge, and she took one look at Hazel the first time she came in and said, "You're August's granddaughter." Hazel had said, "How did you know?" Mrs. Kittredge had said, "Because he told everyone in this town he was looking for you. For 20 years, honey. Everyone in this town knew you were coming. We just didn't know when." Hazel had stood at the register with a jar of peanut butter and a loaf of bread and cried in front of a stranger. Mrs. Kittredge had come around the counter. She had put her arms around Hazel. She had said, "Welcome home, honey." He would have been so glad. She started organizing the hidden room. She did not know how at first. She just knew she had to start somewhere, so she started with the trunks against the north wall. She took things out, slowly. She matched every object with its label, every photograph with its city, every letter with its date. She built a ledger. She built it in a big leather book she found on the reading room shelf. She numbered every item. She wrote down what it was, who it had belonged to, when it had been left at the house. She wrote down every note her grandfather had made about the family the object belonged to. She wrote down whether anyone was still looking. It took her weeks. It took her weeks, and she was not done. But something happened during those weeks. She started to understand what her grandfather had built. He had not been a collector. He had not been a hoarder. He had not been a strange old man on a lake hoarding other people's grief. He had been a keeper. He had been the person in the community whom other people trusted with the things they could not throw away and could not display. The letters they were afraid the fire would take. The photographs they were afraid the flood would claim. The wedding rings of the sons who did not come home. The baby shoes of the babies who did not grow up. He had sat with these things. He had kept them dry. He had kept them clean. He had kept them sorted. He had kept them in some cases for 50 years. So that when a granddaughter finally showed up looking for a grandmother's letter, the letter would be there. He had been keeping small pieces of other people's hearts in a hidden room under a floating house on a quiet lake. And when he had realized his own heart was running out of time, he had gone looking for the person he loved most in the world. So the keeping could continue. Hazel understood one afternoon in late June, sitting on the floor of the archive room with a bundle of letters in her lap, that this was what he had left her. Not a house, a calling. She did not know if she wanted it. She sat with that. She did not answer the question that day. She made a small website. She called it Willowmere Memory House. She wrote a single paragraph on the homepage. If you have lost a photograph, a letter, or a small object that once belonged to your family, and if you believe it may have passed through my grandfather's hands, you may write to us. His name was August Merrick. He kept things for people quietly for over 50 years. His records are extensive. His care was total. I'm learning to continue what he began. She signed it Hazel Merrick Keeper. She almost didn't put that last word. She stared at it for a long time. Keeper. I am not a keeper. I don't know how to be a keeper. I'm a waitress. I lived in a mudroom. I don't even know how to answer email properly. Then a second thought, quieter. He said I was allowed to say no. He said I didn't owe him this. Then a third, quieter still. But I don't want to say no. I want to be for someone else what he tried to be for me. She left the word in. She published the page. Within 3 weeks, she had 200 emails. Within 2 months, over 600. Most were from women. Most were from women over 60. They wrote in the voice of women who had been carrying something small and unfinished for a very long time. A letter they knew their mother had written. A photograph they knew their aunt had left at a lake house. A pocket watch that had belonged to a father who had died before they were old enough to know his face. Hazel answered each one. She checked the ledger. She checked the trunks. She found things. She found more than she thought she would. She found a bundle of postcards for a woman in Iowa whose mother had sent them to a fiancé who had never come home from the Merchant Marine in 1959. The woman had known they existed. She had spent 40 years trying to find them. She had thought they were lost. Hazel mailed them back to her. 2 weeks later, Hazel received a letter. Handwritten, 3 pages, Dear Miss Merrick. I opened the package sitting at my kitchen table. My husband was in the other room. I read my mother's handwriting for the first time in 52 years. I could hear her voice. In every line, I could hear her voice. I have not been able to stop crying. Please tell your grandfather thank you. Please tell him I have been looking. Please tell him I found her again. Because of him. Hazel read that letter in the rocking chair by the window. She read it 3 times. Then she went down into the archive room, and she said out loud to the walls, I'll tell him, I promise. Adele came every week. Sometimes she brought groceries, sometimes she brought muffins, sometimes she brought nothing but herself. They cooked together, they sat on the dock together. They did not talk about big things every visit. Sometimes they just watched the light change on the water, and Adele said, Your mother would have loved this, exactly this. And Hazel would nod, and they would go on watching. Adele taught Hazel how to make a pie crust from scratch. Hazel had never made pie, she had only ever served it. Adele said, You use cold butter. You use cold water. You do not overwork the dough. You keep your hands quick and light. Your mother was very good at pie. She used to say you have to trust the crust. If you don't trust the crust, it knows. Hazel laughed. Adele said, There she is. Hazel said, Who? Adele said, Your mother's laugh. Honey, you laugh exactly like her. In the same spot in your chest. It comes out of the same place. Hazel had to sit down on the kitchen floor. She just needed to sit down. Because how do you carry that? How do you carry the fact that your laugh is the last living thing your mother made and it has been living inside you your whole life and you never knew? How do you carry it? You don't. You don't carry it. You let it walk with you. That was what Hazel decided that day, on the kitchen floor. With Adele leaning against the counter and quietly not looking at her so Hazel could feel what she was feeling without being watched. August was in early, that year. It had been a wet spring and then a hot early summer, and by mid-August the lake was very still and very warm, and the trees around Willowmere were already quietly thinking about turning. Hazel was on the dock the afternoon it happened. She was reading a letter from a woman in Oregon about a photograph of a father. She looked up. There was a man standing at the top of the hill. He was not moving. He was just standing there. Hazel's stomach tightened immediately, because she did not know this man. He was thin, 40s, weathered. He wore a denim jacket that had seen more than one hard winter. He had a small canvas bag over his shoulder. He was carrying it wrong, like he wasn't used to having anything to carry. I was looking at the house, not at Hazel, at the house, like he had seen it before, like he was afraid of it. Hazel stood up. She said loud enough to reach him, "Can I help you?" He turned toward her. He didn't answer right away. His face was Hazel's breath caught. Because she knew that face, not the man, the face, the bones of the face, the shape of the eyes, the exact angle of the jaw. She had seen it that morning, in a photograph, in the back of a photo album on the second shelf of the reading room. A picture of two children on this very dock. A little girl, maybe 8. A little boy, maybe 4. Both of them in bathing suits. The little boy was making a face. The little girl had one arm slung over his shoulder. On the back of the photograph in her grandfather's handwriting, Rosalind and Jasper, summer '89. Jasper, her uncle. Her mother's little brother. Her mother's little brother who had gone missing after her mother died. Whom August had mentioned in exactly 2 of the 22 letters. Whom August had said in the film that he no longer knew how to find. Hazel took a step back on the dock. Not out of fear, out of pure shock. The man at the top of the hill said softly, "You're her." Hazel said, "You're Jasper." He said, "I didn't know if I should come." She said, "How did you know I was here?" He said, "I read the paper." He said, "The obituary. It ran in a small paper about 90 miles east of here. I picked it up in a truck stop 3 weeks ago. I've been trying to decide since then." He said, "I saw the name Merrick. I saw the words survived by his granddaughter, Hazel. And I—" He stopped. He put a hand on the roof of the Buick to steady himself. He said, "I have not heard my sister's daughter's name spoken out loud in 18 years. Hazel stood on the dock. She did not move. She could not. Because the shape of him, the shape of his shoulders, the shape of the way he stood on a hill and could not come closer. She knew that shape. She had lived that shape. That was the shape of a person who had been away from a house for so long that they no longer believed they were allowed to walk back into it. She said, "You don't have to stay up there." He said, "I don't know if I should come down." She said, "Why?" He said, "Because I don't have a good reason to be here, honey." The word slipped out. His voice was rough. His voice was worn. His voice sounded like a road that had been driven on too many years without repair. But the word honey came out easy, automatic, like it had been sitting in his mouth for 18 years waiting. He caught himself. He said, "I'm sorry, I don't have the right to call you that." Hazel said, "You can come down." He said, "Are you sure?" She said no. She said it honestly. She said, "But come down anyway." He came down the hill slowly. Not slowly like an old man. Slowly like a man who was afraid the dock was going to disappear under his feet the closer he got. He stopped a few feet from her. He set the canvas bag down on the wood. He put his hands in his jacket pockets, then took them out, then put them back in, then took them out again. He said, "You look like her." Hazel said, "I know." He said, I mean, you really look like her. It's not just, it's the way you stand. It's the tilt of your head. It's—" He stopped, his eyes filled. He said, "I'm sorry. I said I wasn't going to do this." Hazel said, "It's okay." He said, "It's not okay." He said, "It's not okay because I was supposed to be there." She said, "When?" He said, "Every time." He sat down on the edge of the dock. He did not ask permission. He just sat down hard, like his knees had made the decision without him. He said, "Honey, I need to tell you some things, and I need to tell you fast, because if I slow down, I'm going to talk myself back into the truck and drive off, and I have been driving off from this dock in my mind for 18 years, so I want to do it different today." Hazel sat down beside him. Not close enough. She said, "Okay." When your mother died, I was 23. I was in college, 2 states away. She called me in March. She told me she was sick. She told me the doctors thought she had 6 months. She said, don't come home yet. She said, finish the semester. She said, Jasper, I want you to graduate. I want that for me. You finishing what you started, please. So I did not come home in March. I did not come home in April either. She died on a Sunday in early May. I got the phone call in a laundromat. I was folding a shirt. I remember I was folding a shirt. And I stopped folding and I sat down on the linoleum and I stayed on the linoleum until a stranger came over and asked me if I needed a doctor. I never went back to that laundromat. I did not finish the semester. I came home for the funeral. I stayed for 3 days. I sat at the kitchen table in this house with your grandfather. I could not look at him. I could not make myself look at my own father in the eye because I felt like I had been given a job. And the job had been to graduate. And instead the job had been to come home. And I had not known. I had not known the two jobs were the same job, and I had picked the wrong one. I know that's not rational. Grief is not rational. But grief lived in me like a piece of furniture. It just moved in. And I could not get it out of my head that if I had come home in March, she would have lived. Which is not true. It is not true. Her heart was going to give out. It was going to give out whether I was there or not. But I could not. He stopped. He put his face in his hands. Hazel said softly, you were a kid. He said, I was old enough. She said, for what? He said, for you. He looked up. You were 4. You were staying with your mother's neighbor. And when I came home for the funeral, that neighbor brought you to the house. And you sat in your grandmother's lap on this dock. And I stood back there. He pointed to the shore behind that pine tree. And I could not walk down here because I could not look at your face. You had her mouth. You already had her mouth. At 4. I could not, honey, I could not. I left after the funeral. I went back to school. I dropped out. I moved again. I moved again. I did not tell anybody where I went. I stopped calling your grandfather. I stopped opening his letters. I threw them away for a while, and then I stopped throwing them away because throwing them away hurt more than saving them, and then I saved them, and I did not read them. I drank for a long time. I drank a lot. And then somewhere in there, I think it was 2010, a cousin of mine called me, and she said, Jasper, there is a little girl in the system, somewhere in the Midwest. Your dad is trying to find her. He needs help. And I said, I'm not able to help. And I hung up. That is the worst thing I've ever done. Hazel was quiet a long time. She looked at the lake. The lake was very still. She said finally, how long since you had a drink? He said, 2 years. She said, okay. He said, that's not enough time. She said, it's enough time to come here. He looked at her. His eyes were red. He said, I don't expect anything from you. I want to say that clearly. I don't want money. I don't want a place to stay. I don't want a relationship. I wanted to see you once so I could stop wondering. So I could go somewhere else and know that at least I had come, at least once. Hazel said, you knew my mother. He said, I did. She said, I don't. He looked at her. He said, I know. She said, I have been trying to know her through letters, through a movie of my grandfather, through a woman named Adele who comes every week and drinks tea with honey. He said, Adele's still around. Hazel said, yes. He said, oh, thank God. He said it like a prayer. She said, you knew my mother her whole life. You lived in a house with her. You saw her at breakfast. You saw her in a bad mood. You saw her laugh. He said, yes. She said, I would like to know those things. He said, honey. She said, you don't have to be my uncle. You don't have to be my family. You don't have to be anything. But I would like it if you came inside, and I would like it if you drank a cup of chamomile tea with honey. And I would like it if you told me one story about her. Just one. And then if you want to go, you can go. And if you want to come back next week, you can come back next week. He looked at her. He looked at her for a long time. He said, your mother told me something once. She was 17. We were on that swing right there. He pointed to the porch swing on the front of the floating house. And she said to me, Jasper, when I have a daughter, she is going to be so much stronger than me. She is going to know how to ask for things. She is going to know how to open a door and walk into a room. She is not going to wait to be invited. He said, you just did that, honey. He said, you just did the thing she wanted you to do. Hazel put her hand over her mouth. She could not answer. He stood up. He held out his hand. She took it. He helped her up. They walked into the floating house together. He stayed for 3 weeks, not in the house. He would not let her offer. He rented a room above the general store in Miller's Point from Mrs. Kittredge for $11 a night. He walked the 7 miles out to Willowmere every morning and walked back every night. He said the walk was good for him. He said his knees needed the work. Every evening he came to the porch of the floating house, and Hazel made chamomile tea, always with honey, never with sugar. And every evening he told her one story, just one. That was the rule they had settled on. Because Hazel had said at the end of the first night, if you tell me everything at once, I won't be able to hold it. And Jasper had said, that's fair, that is completely fair. He told her about the time Rosalind had climbed the tallest tree in the yard when she was 7, gotten stuck, and refused to come down because the view was too good. He told her about this time Rosalind had taught him to play 3 chords on a guitar when he was 10 and she was 13, and then had immediately made him play those 3 chords over and over while she wrote a song about a dog she didn't have. He told her about the way Rosalind had cried at the end of every animal movie ever made, even the ones with happy endings, because she said the animals didn't know it was fiction, and they had probably been scared during filming. He told her about the way Rosalind had at 24 sat on this dock with a newborn Hazel in her arms and had turned to Jasper and had said Jasper stopped in the middle of that story. He looked at the water. He said, she turned to me. She was tired. She had these dark circles. She was so tired. And she looked down at you, and then she looked up at me, and she said, Jasper, look at what I made. And I looked, and I said, she's beautiful, Rosie. And your mother said, no, not beautiful, alive. Look at her. She's alive. I made something alive. Jasper said, you were about 6 weeks old. He said, I have thought about that sentence for 22 years. Hazel put her head against his shoulder. She had not planned to. She just did. He did not move. He held very still, like a man who has been given a small living thing. By the end of the 3rd week, Jasper had a job. Mrs. Kittredge had asked him to help her fix the porch on the general store. He was good with his hands. He said he could stay a month if she wanted. She said she wanted. He told Hazel he might stay through the fall. She said that would be okay. He said, you're sure? She said, yes. He said, I don't want to overstay. She said, Uncle Jasper. She said it easy. She said it the way a person says a word they have been practicing quietly for weeks. He looked at her. His eyes filled. She said, you couldn't overstay if you tried. September came. The trees around Willowmere started to turn. Hazel woke up one Sunday morning and knew what day it was. It was the day she was going to open the small envelope. The one August had mentioned. The one under the 3rd floorboard by the kitchen sink. Open it when you are ready, he had said in the film. You will know when you are ready. Trust me. She had thought about the envelope every day for 4 months. She had not touched it. She had not lifted the floorboard once. She had walked past that spot in the kitchen 1,000 times, and she had left it alone. Because part of her knew that whatever was under the floorboard was going to change her one more time, and she had wanted first to be someone who could survive being changed. She was that person now. She knew that now. She was that person now. She got up, she made chamomile tea with honey, she sat with it, she drank it slowly. Then she got down on her hands and knees in the kitchen. She lifted the 3rd floorboard. There was a small metal box underneath. She lifted the box out. She sat down on the kitchen floor with the box in her lap. She opened it. Inside was a cassette tape. A single cassette tape, old, faded. The label was handwritten, in her mother's handwriting. She knew because she had read enough letters by now to know the difference between her mother's handwriting and her grandfather's. The label said, for my daughter, June, Rosalind. Under the tape folded into a small square was a note, in August's handwriting. Honey, your mother made this tape 2 months before you were born. She did not know she was going to die. Nobody did. She made it because she was a woman who wrote small things down. Because she was a woman who made small recordings. Because she was a woman who trusted the future with what she had to say. She gave it to me to hold. She said, Daddy put this somewhere safe so that if I get too busy being a mother, I can play it for her someday and remember what I was thinking before she came. She did not get to play it for you. I've never played it. Not once. It is exactly as she left it. I did not want to be the first person to hear her voice again after she died. I wanted that voice to be waiting for you. Play it when you are ready. And then play it as many times as you need to. I love you, Hazel. Grandpa August. Hazel put the note down. She sat very still. She sat still for a long time. She thought about the 8-year-old at the window in the butter yellow sweater. She thought about the 16-year-old milking cows before sunrise. She thought about the 19-year-old at the end of the driveway with a canvas bag. She thought about the 22-year-old on the dock the day she arrived here, 5 months ago, who had not believed she had ever been loved. She thought all of you, come sit with me. She thought, you get to hear this too. She went into the reading room. There was an old cassette player on the 2nd shelf. She had noticed it weeks ago. She had wondered then why it was there. Now she understood. He had left it for her. He had left everything for her. She brought the cassette player into the kitchen. She set it on the small kitchen table. She put the tape in. She sat down. She pressed play. For a long moment, there was only static, then a small, warm laugh. Just a laugh at nothing, just the sound of a young woman getting comfortable in a chair. Then her voice. Okay, okay. So hi. This is really strange. I feel really strange. A pause, another laugh. Daddy told me to just talk to you. He said pretend she's right here. Pretend she can hear you. So I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna talk to you like you're right here. A pause. Hi, honey. It's me. It's your mama. Hazel put both hands over her mouth. Her mother's voice was her mother's voice was young. That was the first thing. Her mother had been young. Hazel had spent her whole life imagining her mother as a picture, a photograph, someone frozen. But this was a woman, in a room, in a chair, 24 years old, pregnant, a little tired, a little nervous, laughing at herself for talking into a machine. Her mother's voice was warm. That was the second thing. Her mother's voice was warm and low and slightly rough at the edges. It was the voice of a woman who sang in kitchens. It was the voice of a woman who would have called out for you across a parking lot. It was the voice of a woman who would have said, come here, come here, come here, and meant it. Hazel closed her eyes. She listened. Her mother talked for almost 40 minutes. She talked about the nursery. She talked about the color she had painted the walls. She talked about the crib August had built by hand. She talked about the fact that she had been knitting a sweater, that she had been knitting it for months, that she was not a good knitter, that she had ripped it out and started over 4 times, that she was going to finish it before the baby came, that the sweater was going to be butter yellow because she loved butter yellow because it was the color of the light in the kitchen at 6 in the morning in October, and she wanted her daughter to grow up wrapped in warm morning light. Hazel put her hand on her chest. She could not breathe. Her mother said on the tape, I don't know what kind of woman you're going to be, honey. I hope you're braver than me. I hope you're louder than me. I hope you take up all the space you want, and you never ever apologize for it. Her mother said, I hope you know that you're not a mistake. I know a lot of babies get told they're a happy accident, and honey, you are not that. You are a prayer that got answered. I prayed for you for 4 years. Your dad prayed with me for the first year, and then he got scared, and I kept praying. I kept praying by myself. And then one morning I woke up, and I knew you were coming, and I sat on the edge of the bed, and I cried because you had heard me. You had heard me the whole time. Her mother said, I don't know what your life is going to look like. I hope it's soft. I hope people are kind to you. I hope somebody tells you good night. I hope somebody makes you breakfast. I hope somebody holds your hand at the movies. I hope you have a friend who calls you at midnight for no reason. I hope you have a dog. I hope you have a garden. I hope you have a window that faces the sun. Her mother said, I hope you have a place, honey, a place that is yours. Her mother said, and listen to me. Listen. If anything ever happens to me, and nothing is going to, but if it does, I want you to know. I want you to know you were wanted. From the very beginning, you were wanted. Before I saw your face, before I knew your name, before I knew whether you had 10 fingers and 10 toes, you were wanted. You are wanted. You will always have been wanted. There is no version of this world in which you are not wanted. Her mother was quiet for a moment, then softer. Okay, baby girl, I'm going to sing you something now. It's a little song I've been making up. It doesn't have a name. I don't know if I'll remember it later, so I'm putting it here so you can have it, in case. And then her mother sang. She sang a lullaby, slow, simple, in a low voice, untitled. Nothing anyone had ever heard before. Nothing anyone else in the world had ever sung. It was for Hazel, just for Hazel. Hazel sat at the kitchen table. She listened. She did not move. She did not cry at first. She was too full to cry. When her mother finished the song, her mother laughed, softly. Her mother said, I love you, baby. I love you already. I love you more than anything I have ever loved in my life. I don't even have to meet you. I already know. Then the tape clicked. Then the tape stopped. Hazel sat at the table for a long, long time. Then she rewound the tape. She played it again. She played it again after that. She played it 4 times that first night. She fell asleep with her head on the kitchen table and her mother's lullaby playing softly under her cheek. 2 weeks later, on the last Saturday of September, Hazel held the first annual gathering at the floating house. She had not planned it as an annual anything. She had put a small notice on the website. She had written, if you have found something here that belonged to your family, and if you would like to come see the lake where it was kept, please come on the last Saturday of September. There will be a small ceremony at dusk. There will be paper lanterns. There will be tea. She had thought maybe 30 people would come. 300 came. They came from 17 states. They came in cars and campers and one small yellow bus rented by a family in Missouri who all wanted to come together. They came with photographs. with letters, with small objects. They came with their grown children and their grandchildren. They came mostly older, 60, 70, 80. Women mostly. Women in soft cardigans. Women with silver hair. Women who had been carrying small, unfinished griefs for a very long time, and who had, because of a floating house on a quiet lake and a young woman who had inherited a promise, been given something back. They filled the shore around Willowmere. They stood on the grass. They sat on blankets. They passed around thermoses of coffee. They talked to each other in the low, easy voices of people who had all been given the same gift and who all recognized each other for it, even though they had never met. At dusk, Hazel handed out paper boats, small ones, with little tea lights inside. She said into a microphone she had borrowed from Mrs. Kittredge, "Write a name." She said anyone, anyone at all. Someone you loved, someone you're still learning about, someone you never got to meet. She said, "Then we'll put them on the water." They wrote, all of them. 300 small hands, 300 small names. They walked to the shore. They knelt at the edge of the lake. They set the boats on the water. The lake filled with light. It filled slowly then all at once. 300 small flames drifting away from the shore. Some clumped together, some drifted alone, all of them moving gently out into the dark water. Hazel stood at the end of the dock. Adele was on her left. Adele's hand was on the small of Hazel's back, steady. Jasper was on her right. He had his hands in his jacket pockets. He was looking at the water. He was not crying, but he was not crying either. He was somewhere in between. He was going to be somewhere in between for a while. Behind them, 300 people were quiet. Hazel stepped to the microphone. She said, "I have been trying to figure out what to say tonight. For weeks. And I could not. So I'm just going to say what is true. I grew up believing nobody was looking for me. I grew up believing I was the kind of person you could set down and forget. I grew up believing that if I was useful enough, quiet enough, small enough, people would let me stay in the rooms I was in. I was wrong. I was wrong about every single one of those things. My grandfather looked for me for 22 years. A woman I did not know made me a promise before I was born and kept it for 22 years. My uncle carried a shame the size of the sky for 18 years, and one day he finally set the shame down and drove here and walked down a hill and let me see him. My mother made a tape 2 months before I was born, just in case. She made it in case she did not get to tell me. She left it in a small metal box under a floorboard. My grandfather kept it there for 22 years without ever listening to it. So the first person that voice ever reached was me. Her voice caught. She let it catch. She let the microphone hear it. If I, a little girl who spent her whole life in a window seat, was loved that hard by that many people I never got to meet, then I promise you, no one in this room is alone. No one you have loved is gone. No one who loved you ever stopped. Love keeps looking, even after we cannot see it, even after years, even after everything. She looked out at the water, at the 300 small lights drifting into the dark. She said softly into the microphone, "Thank you for finding me, Grandpa." She said, "I found you too." The lanterns kept moving, out into the middle of the lake. Small lights. Adele squeezed her hand. Jasper leaned over and very quietly kissed the top of her head. Behind them, 300 people quietly began to cry. Not loudly, just quietly. The way people cry when something inside them, long shut, has finally been allowed to open. Somewhere above, one loon called across the water. The lake carried the lights. The lights kept going. The floating house rocked gently in the dark. And Hazel Merrick, 22 years old, once a girl in a window seat, once a girl in a mudroom, once a girl at the end of a driveway with a canvas bag, stood at the end of the dock in a butter yellow sweater her mother had knitted 22 years before, and knew for the first time in her life that she was home. The end.